Hey friends, welcome to MidWeek. We're so glad that you're joining with us, and I hope that you're taking some time to just go out and enjoy the beautiful weather we've been having this week. It seems like spring is just peeking its head around the corner, and hopefully it'll stay, but who knows? Who knows? And so we're so glad that you're here with us, and if you've been with us in our last study, I hope that you've taken some of those principles that we've learned about establishing relationships, the tactics we have within relationships and how we can apply those to our spiritual relationship with Jesus, the one that matters most important in all of our relationships, and that you're growing in him every single day. But we're gonna stop that series, as last week was the last one on knowing Jesus, and tonight we're gonna start a brand new study, and we're gonna pull away from the topical concept and dive straight into the Bible. So for the next several weeks, we're gonna walk through one book of the Bible. In fact, it's going to be one character of the Bible. And this guy is oftentimes the most underrated character, in my opinion. And it's the guy of Joshua, the book of Joshua. And rightfully so. I mean, imagine being Joshua and you are the successor to one of the founding fathers of the faith, if you will, Moses himself. I mean, Moses is so important that you see him in Matthew 17 in the Transfiguration. We see Moses and Elijah there. Like those guys are some heavy hitters. And even more so, you see in the book of Jude, the little one chapter book right in front of Revelation, where the archangel Michael is fighting the archangel Lucifer, Satan, over the body and the rights of Moses. So Moses is a big deal. And then you have Joshua, who is his successor and oftentimes just overlooked because he fits in between Moses and Elijah. And so there's a lot that happens there. But before we get into the book of Joshua, before we start looking at him as a person, let's summarize where we are and how we got to this point. And so the Bible starts in Genesis. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Number, and Deuteronomy are all the 5 books that were written by Moses. And this is called the Torah, the first 5 books, also called the Law of Moses, or maybe you've heard it as the Pentateuch. Now, some scholars will throw Joshua in there and call it the Hexateuch, 6 books in the beginning, because they say he's so close to the Torah, being that he's the successor of Moses, that he should be included in that framework. We don't really necessarily agree with that. Joshua is kind of his own study. But the Torah is the book of law, the law of Moses. And so let's kind of summarize that whole thing so we can understand Joshua just a little bit better. So in Genesis, we see the creation of everything, the creation of the universe, the world, people. And in Genesis 3, we see sin come into the world through Adam and Eve, and now things have become corrupted. The fall of man has taken place. And now we start to see the call of Abraham and the development of Israel, right? And so as that starts to happen, we see the genealogies from Genesis take place, and Israel is starting to develop. And Genesis ends with the nation of Israel as we start to see the tribes being formed. Now, Israel gets caught in slavery. That's where we pick up in Exodus. And through Exodus, God calls one man, Moses, to lead Israel out of this slavery. How do you lead an entire people group? We're talking maybe 1 million people at this point, out of slavery, especially slavery in Egypt. And so they are ruled by an iron fist, the Pharaoh, and Israel is just suffering. And the book of Exodus is such a fascinating study, but we're not going to go there. We're just summarizing this whole thing. But in the book of Exodus, you see Moses take the call. He struggled with the feeling of being worthy to do so because he just had some issues he had to deal with. But God called him to be the one to lead the people. And so as he's leading Israel through, they get through all this. We see the 10 plagues happen in Exodus, and Moses starts to lead them through on dry ground through the sea, and they get over there, and now they're in the wilderness. What could have been just a couple-week journey to the promised land that God has provided for them is allowing them to have. They ended up questioning everything, and they ended up roaming the wilderness just like lost puppies because they weren't faithful to what God is showing them. They weren't obedient to what God is calling them for. So they ended up being lost for many years. And they finally get to this point where now Moses is giving them the law. This is what God is commanding us as a people. And if we can live through these laws, if we can live life according to how God is showing us, we will have life abundantly. For one, we're going to trust God with everything, and we're going to know that he can provide because he's already proven himself worthy. And yet people still struggled with this. Moses himself still had problems as he's dealing with the people of Israel, as he's going face to face, talking to God himself, trying to navigate through all this. This is heavy, heavy stuff. And through his own sin and his own doubt and his own anger, he now is excommunicated from the promised land. He can lead people to the Jordan. He just can't cross over. And so then he gives the law. He goes through the law. He's telling the people, this is how you should live. He's understood kind of what his punishment is, if you will, and what God is doing with them. But he goes all in on making sure the people of Israel understand who God is. And so now we get all the way through here. We're getting ready to cross over into the land that has been promised all the way to Abraham for the people to cross over. And now Moses says goodbye, and Joshua takes over. Just look at Joshua 1, the very first verse. It says, now Moses is dead. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving them to the people of Israel. So now we see the call of Joshua. But did you notice who he was? He isn't just a random stranger that's just one of the Israelites and he picked up from some tribe. This is someone who's been Moses' assistant. So he's kind of knowing the ins and outs of what's taking place. He has seen what God has done. Now, there's private conversations that Moses has with God himself in the tent of meetings, it's called. But I'm sure Moses came back to start telling Joshua some of the game plan. So Joshua isn't a stranger to what's going on here. And God now calls him to step up to the plate. And he says, Joshua, here's the mission I have for you. But there's some interesting things that you're going to notice. And I'm going to kind of just tell you briefly through this chapter of Joshua 1, is that he knows for a fact that God is with him. God tells him he is going to be with him. If you continue to read through the chapter, what you're going to see is that God lets him know, I will be with you every single step of the way. Every step of the way. Now, let me ask you this. If you knew for a fact that God is calling you into a mission, knowing exactly what you're supposed to do, giving it all laid out there, and he says, I will be with you every single step that you take. He even goes as bold to say, no man will be able to stand against you. That's a pretty bold declaration that God is giving to Joshua. Yet what you'll find is 4 times in this chapter, verse 6, verse 7, verse 9, and the last verse, verse 18, you hear this other command where it says, be strong and courageous. Now, wait a minute. Why in the world would you need to be courageous in a moment where you already know that God is with you? Why would you need courage at all when you're standing with the King of Kings, when you're standing with the Lord of Lords, the creator of all things, the one who has called you in, and you've seen him do all the things that he's done? Why would God tell you to be strong and courageous? Well, let's look at them. Let's look at verse 6. It says, be strong and courageous. He's talking to Joshua. For you shall cause this people to inherit the land I swore to their fathers to give them. Why would he need to be strong and courageous for that? Well, there's going to be many challenges as we start to read through this, many challenges that are going to be facing as he navigates through that. You're going to need to be strong. I mean, imagine being a political leader. I've thought about this as of late. I mean, we've had a lot of election stuff in the last 6 months, still even going on. And I've come to the conclusion I would never want to be a politician. I mean, all we see is what's happening at face value, but all the things that happen behind closed doors, all the corruption that's taken place, regardless of what party you're on, all the people that you have to please, that you have to answer to, would be enough to make any man go insane, right? Anybody. And so there has to be a strength there. There has to be a perseverance when you are leading a people of this caliber, of this size. I mean, we're talking 1 million+ people that is being led now by Joshua. So there's going to be a lot of complaints. A lot of people are going to have an opinion. A lot of people are going to be questioning what God is doing. They did it with Moses, and they're going to do it with Joshua. So he needs to be strong and courageous and willing to tell people what needs to be said in order to honor what God is calling him to. Right? Now let's look at verse 7. He says, only be strong and very courageous. Notice there's a different word here. Very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law of Moses, my servant, commanded you. This is interesting because now he's saying something different. Be courageous enough to follow the law. That one gets me. I never look at that as being obedience to being courageous. And what God is telling Joshua is be courageous enough to do what is right. Be courageous enough to follow what I am telling you. Because guys, we live in a world, even today, a world where mass noise is all over the place. And we are being sucked into this lie and sucked into that lie and being told to go this direction and told to go that direction. And we get so far from the truth, and so many things are trying to grab our attention, that God is trying to speak through Joshua all the way these 4,000 years later, talking to you right now, saying, be courageous enough to know what God is commanding you. Be courageous enough to know what God is commanding you. Do not turn from it, is what he says. Continue to look at verse 7. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may have good successes wherever you go. This is a promise that he's given to Joshua. If you stay true to what I'm telling you, if you're staying true to what's been commanded of you, and you remain obedient in this, you will be successful. Yet all of us, all of the time, question whether this is true. If I just follow what God says, will I have an abundant life? Will I be successful in my endeavors? And what God says is yes. Now, that doesn't mean health and wealth by any means. That just means when you honor God and you honor what he's told you to do and you honor his commandments, you can't go wrong, even when the bad days come. And that is such a strong declaration. Go a couple verses later to verse 9. He says, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. So he's saying, be strong and courageous here. Why? Do not be afraid. Well, what would he have to be afraid of? The unknown. I mean, haven't you been afraid of the unknown? Whether it's a career move, whether it's moving to a different location, whether it's a big thing that you got to go this way, maybe it's a college, whatever you had to do. These are big things that you're navigating in the world of the unknown, because sometimes taking a risk can be awfully scary. I mean, I know that God is with me, but I don't see him every day. I don't get to see him physically. So I have to trust that he is leading me, and I have to trust that the decisions I'm making are going to be good enough for the Lord. And what he's telling Joshua is, don't be afraid, because what Joshua is about to come up against in the land of Canaan is a malicious group of people who are so far from God, who are taking babies, offering them to the god of Moloch, and sacrificing them at the altar. Like, he is getting ready to go and lead people through that. And God says, I will conquer all of your enemies. You just have to trust me. Is Joshua afraid? You bet he is. But God says, be courageous. Do not fear. And then lastly, verse 18, very last verse, this is where the people now of Israel are telling Joshua, hey, we respect you as our leader. We're going to give you the same respect that we gave to Moses. We trust you. And wherever you tell us to go, we'll go, as long as it's honoring the God that Moses served and the God that you serve. We will follow you all the days that we can. And if anybody goes against what you say, your word shall be done and they will be put to death. That's how serious the group is on what Joshua is about to do. Look at verse 18. It says, whoever rebels against your commandments and disobeys your words, whatever you command him shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. What does this mean? Well, there might be some times where you have to courageously call people out. You may have to. Joshua is going to have to check some people who are not living righteously. And we're going to see through this book where that has to happen, a man by the name of Achan specifically. And this is going to take place, and you have to have the courage to be able to tell somebody you are not living in pocket with what God has designed for you. And that's really hard as Christians sometimes, to navigate through some of this stuff, where we really have to take a brother aside and say, listen, you've got to shape up, man. This is not the life that God has called for you. You're living your own way. You're going your own direction. And you start to ask where God is in your life. But God, why would he put himself in the mess that you're creating for yourself when you can have a life with God? Just surrender to him. And so those four areas that I think in chapter 1 are significant for us today is that we need to be strong and courageous too. Strong enough to listen to the word of God, to obey what it says, to not fear, right? And to be able to call people out when we need to. People of the church who call themselves Christians. All of those things, if it was good for Joshua to be strong and courageous, it has to be good for us too. Friends, I am looking forward to navigating through this with you as we explore the person of Joshua and just realize the kind of underdog he really is. So buckle your seatbelts. We're going on a journey. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.